I'm going to talk about the world's longest lived cultures and some of the lessons they have to teach us, but I'm going to start with you. I'm a big fan of the notion that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So I'm going to start by calculating each and every one of yours life expectancy. And to do that, I have to ask you 8 questions. And your job is to raise your hand if the question pertains to you. And secondly, the hard part right before lunch, remember how many times you raise your hand. So you ready? They start easy and then get hard. Okay, first question, raise your hand if you sleep at least 7.5 hours most nights. 7.5 hours most nights. All right, fairly well rested. Raise your hand if you move at least 30 minutes every day, and that could be at the gym or gardening or walking or getting to work. An active crowd. Raise your hand if you eat at least 3 honest servings of vegetables every day, and French fries and ketchup do not count. 3 honest. Okay, about half. Raise your hand if you have not, and I underscore not, had unprotected sex with a stranger. I said not. I'm going to hang out with you guys. Raise your hand if you have at least 3 friends who, wait for it, you can call them on a bad day, they'll care. Number 2, you can have a meaningful conversation with them. And number 3, you actually like them. 3 friends that meet all 3. All right, almost everybody. Raise your hand if you belong to a faith-based community. Doesn't matter if it's Christian, Jewish, Muslim, doesn't matter. Faith, keep your hands up, faith-based community. Keep them up if you show up at least 4 times a month. Oh, there's one, okay. Easy one. Raise your hand if you don't smoke. You haven't smoked in the last 5 years. All right, almost everyone. And finally, raise your hand if you have the desire and you believe the health to reach at least age 90. At least age 90. That question is actually the biggest predictor of how long you're going to live, because you know 3 things your doctor doesn't know. You know how you've treated your body, you know how you feel today, and you know how you intend to act in the future. But that is not as good a predictor as the cumulative of these 8 questions. So now I'm going to tell you how long you're going to live. If you raised your hand at least twice and you're a man, your life expectancy is 69, and if you're a woman, it's 72. If you raised your hand at least 5 times and you're a man, life expectancy is 79, and if you're a woman, it's 83. And if you raised your hand at least 7 times and you're a man, life expectancy is 88, and if you're a woman, it's 92. Did anybody raise their hand all 8 times? Anybody raise their hand all 8 times? Good, I was going to send you into the liquor lounge if you were. For the rest of us, I have something to say. So as David pointed out, and also as a result of something called the Danish twin studies, we know that only about 20% of how long you live is dictated by your genes. The other 80% is lifestyle and environment, maybe healthcare. But I'm actually going to argue it's environment. So about 12 years ago, working for National Geographic and funded by the National Institutes on Aging, we struck out to, in a sense, reverse engineer longevity. We hired a team of top-notch demographers to identify the statistically longest-lived pockets in the world. We call them blue zones areas. And then another team of experts who would help us use standardized methodologies to distill what explains longevity in these places and come up with common denominators. And remarkably, we found no matter where you went and you saw people reaching age 100 at extraordinary rates, they were doing the same 9 things. The same 9 characteristics were happening over and over and over again. And I'm going to tell you what those 9 things are. But first, since I have the benefit of National Geographic photography, I thought I'd take you very quickly to each of these 5 blue zones areas and then sum it up at the end. So we found the first blue zone about 200 miles off the coast of Italy on the island of Sardinia, up in the highlands, an area called the Nuoro province. 14 villages, 42,000 people. And here you find the world's longest lived men. And when you look at what they do, you find it mostly among the shepherds there. People have regular low-intensity physical activity. They're not doing CrossFit. Their diet is mostly composed of the foods that they can bring in the fields, whole wheat bread, the grass-fed pecorino cheese that their animals produce. But when they get home, most of the time they're eating a Mediterranean diet, as you might suspect. Even though they live on an island, very little fish, Very little meat about fewer than 5 times per month, never beef, occasionally pork after church on Sunday. But more important than what they do and what they eat, we found it was their norms that explained most of their longevity. Unlike America, where we tend to celebrate youth, in Sardinia, the older you get, the more celebrated you are. So older people are looked at as repositories of wisdom. They counsel the mayors. They hold the agricultural wisdom, the culinary wisdom, and they stick around the family. And sure enough, that families that keep an aging parent nearby benefit from something called the grandmother effect, that shows that children who live in a home with a grandparent actually have lower rates of disease, lower rates of mortality, and they actually do better in school. We found the longest lived women on the other side of the planet, Okinawa, Japan. About 30 times more centenarians among women in Okinawa than you'd expect to see in America here. Once again, plant-based diet, a lot of sweet potatoes and tofu and bitter melon. But again, more important than what they eat, the social norms. David talked about loneliness. Well, in Okinawa, you're somewhat protected by that because just about every person there belongs to something called a moai, a committed social network where people kind of have each other's back for their lifetime. The reason I show this picture here is these 5 girls belong to the same moai, and they have so for 97 years. Their average age is 102. And every night they get together to gossip, drink sake, and argue about who that hot guy liked best back in 1942. So they stay engaged. Also remarkably, the Okinawan language does not even have the word for retirement. It doesn't exist for them, this artificial punctuation between your working life and your life of repose. Instead, the word ikigai, the reason for which I wake up in the morning, imbues their entire adult life. Keeps them going, keeps them motivated, keeps them engaged. America's Blue Zone area I found just off the San Bernardino Freeway in Loma Linda, California, the highest concentration of Seventh-day Adventists in the world. These are conservative Christians that have been studied extensively by NIA-funded epidemiology studies. Life expectancy for women in this country right now is 80, but for Adventist women, they're living about 9 years longer. And for men, the difference is even more remarkable. Adventist men are living 11 years longer than their North American counterpart. So think about that for a moment. These aren't people who live in some exotic island. They live off the freeway next to the Wiener Hut and the Del Taco. How do they do it? Well, they take their Sabbath very seriously. For 24 hours a week, they focus on their God. They focus on their families. In the afternoon, they take a nature walk. Practice that has evolved a little bit over the decades, but still they get out every single week. They take their diet directly from the Bible, Genesis chapter 1. They're mostly vegetarians, and they belong to a social network that reinforces the right behaviors. Adventists tend to hang out with other Adventists because of their Saturday Sabbath. In Central America, and where the Contras used to have their bases during the time of Reagan, we found the 4th Blue Zone in the Nicoya Peninsula. Remarkably here, middle-aged people have the best chance of reaching a healthy age 92, and I underscore healthy. Why? Well, it might have something to do with their Mesoamerican diet, that trifecta of corn, usually tortillas, squash, and beans, arguably the greatest diet the human species has ever invented. But the real reason for longevity here is probably a little bit more boring. Since about the 1970s, they've had arguably the best population health or public health program in the world. Every man, woman, and child in the entire country has the right to 1 free visit a year from a health ambassador. Like Isabel here. Isabel will show up at every home, no matter what your age, and she'll look in your backyard for dangers of infectious disease. She'll look into your refrigerator for dangers of chronic disease. She'll sit down with you, screen you for depression, take your blood pressure, look for signs of diabetes, and catch the 3-alarm fire of a chronic disease before it ends up in the emergency room costing 6 figures. Costa Rica has 1/2 the rate of middle-age mortality. They spend 1/15 the amount we do on healthcare, and they produce much healthier people. And this wasn't long ago, this was third world. It completely bursts the myth that you have to be rich to be healthy in this country. Finally, our last blue zone we found in Ikaria, Greece. People here have about 7 years more life expectancy and about 1/5 the rate of dementia that we do in the United States, partly because they have the most strict version of the Mediterranean diet anywhere in the world and also drink herbal teas their entire lives that turn out to be diuretics and anti-inflammatories. And like all other blue zones, they tend to garden. So no matter where you go in the world and you see spry centenarians, it's not because at age 50 they said, well, go darn it, I'm going to get on that longevity diet and live another 50 years. They won't go buy a treadmill or join a gym or call an 800 number and buy supplements. In places where people live a long time, it's because longevity happens to them. It's not something that they pursue, it's something that ensues. And that's very different than the way we think about health in this country. No matter where you go on the planet and people live a long time, they don't really exercise as much as they move naturally. They live in places where every time they go to work, school, out to eat, to a friend's house, at occasions a walk. Their houses aren't convenienced with electronic mechanics to engineer out their work. They garden. My team figures they're nudged into movement every 20 minutes or so. They suffer from the same things that stress us out that we do, but they have sacred daily rituals that reverse that inflammation. They pray, they take a nap, they do happy hour, they have language for purpose. A purpose is worth an extra 7 years of life expectancy. They drink a little, 2 to 3 glasses a day, but no, you can't save up and have 24 on the weekend. They eat mostly a plant-based diet. Our team did a meta-analysis of diets in all 5 longevity areas over the last 100 years, and they're eating mostly a plant-based diet. Grains, greens, nuts, and beans are the cornerstone. Very little meat, very little fish, no cow's dairy at all in any of the blue zones, and they drink no sodas, but rather they're drinking 6 glasses of water a day, some tea, coffee, and a little bit of wine at 5. More importantly, their houses are set up so they don't eat quite as much. There's no electronics in the kitchen. They tend to sit down with their families and eat. They eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. And the foundation of all this is how they connect. Their social equity. They tend to keep their families close by. They belong to a faith-based community, and they pay careful attention to who they hang out with. Their 3 best friends tend to be people who eat plant-based, care about them, and ideas of recreation are doing things like gardening or walking. We now know that if your 3 best friends are obese and unhealthy, there's about 150% better chance that you will be yourself. So the maximum life expectancy or average life expectancy of humans living today is about 92 if we do everything right. But in America, we're only hitting age 80 right now collectively, a little less than 80. So we're leaving about a dozen years on the table. People in these blue zones are getting most of these extra 12 years, not because of a diet or an exercise or because of a special health care plan. It's because of a cluster of factors, most of them environmental. They live in communities that make it easy for them to move naturally, to eat the right food. Those good habits are nurtured by the right relationships and fueled by a sense of purpose. It is a mutually supporting network of things that enables them to do the right things for long enough so they don't get sick. The secret to longevity does not lie with our doctors, does not lie with the federal government. I believe the way we're going to achieve it in this country is to take a look at the environments, the places that have achieved the health outcomes we aspire to, and emulate those environments, whether we're individuals at a home, a mayor trying to organize a city, or a developer trying to build a building. Thank you very much.